Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Brooks. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Sullivan County Legislature, and with me today is Robert Doherty, our Chairman. Hello,
Hey,
Robert.
Mike. How's it going today?
And welcome to this edition of Let's Talk Sullivan. Our guest today is our longtime Sullivan County historian, John Conway. And among the many hats that John wears, he is also the president of the Delaware Company, which we'll talk a little bit about.
I believe he's been a historian for almost 30 years.
Longest running?
I believe that's the case.
And it's history is...
That is making history.
You guys are just trying to make me sound old.
John does many things in our county, in our community. Among those, he is the president of the Delaware Company. And John, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you guys today.
How about that, Rob?
We'll see at the end.
So, explain a little bit to the viewers what the Sullivan County historian does.
Believe it or not, that's a question I still get asked quite often. Every county in New York State, by state law, has to have a county historian designated. The municipal historians law actually was passed in New York State in 1919, creating town and village historians, and then it was amended twice. And in 1933, the amendment provided for the appointment of a county historian to oversee all of the municipal historians in that jurisdiction. And so since 1933, Sullivan County has had 7 county historians. But by law, every county in the state is supposed to have a county historian. Beyond that, the job description of the historian is very vague. It's left more or less to the individual counties, and for the most part, according to the language of the law, it's left more or less to the individual historians to frame their own job, depending on their own interests and strengths.
So how did you get the job originally?
Well, I hate to admit this, but frankly, it's a political appointment.
Really?
Is and always has been. And what happened was in 1991, there was a change in what at that time was the Board of Supervisors, which governed the county, and they did not want to reappoint the existing historian, so they came to me and asked if I'd be interested in the job. I said, of course. And it took a couple of years for them to actually, it's a long story about how the transaction took place, but in 1993 I was finally appointed county historian. Sullivan County has a part-time county historian, which is fine for me.
Are there any full-time historians in other counties?
There are at least 2 full-time county historians, interestingly both in counties operated by Republican county executives.
Oh, wow.
Orange County has a full-time county historian, and Dutchess County has a full-time county historian. So you've got Steve Newhouse in Orange and
Marcus Molinaro.
Marcus. Now, obviously, the full-time historians predate both of those tenures as executives, but traditionally those counties have been Republican.
So, what, to the viewers who may not know you write for the Democrat. What put you on the radar, so to speak, of why folks approached you to ask you about being the county historian?
That's a great question, Mike. And actually, my writing predated my appointment as county historian. I had been doing a column for the Times-Herald Record at that point since 1987 on Sullivan County history. And interestingly, I also did one on Ulster County history. No one from Ulster County came and asked me to be county historian.
But you reside in Sullivan.
Exactly. I also did a radio show for a number of years, which we dabbled in Sullivan County history, and so I had begun to build a bit of a reputation. People told me I did more to promote county history in the few years that I was doing this than all the historians had done in years and years before. So I had kind of a reputation, and I think that's why they came to me. I was pretty young at the time, and to have was I 36 years old or some 39 years old, to have a young county historian like that is probably what enabled me to have the longevity that I've had. Most historians are, the oldest guy in the county, they're the county historian.
Well, hopefully we'll continue, and there'll be many, many more years.
Well, I'm planning on at least another 30. I'm not sure what you guys might have in mind.
Well, I don't think we're going to be here for 30, but we'll even know.
That's good to hear.
Let's be optimistic, right? Let's be optimistic about it all. As county historian, you do a lot of research. You've written on a ton of topics. Let me ask you this, what have you learned over the years about Sullivan County?
You know, Mike, that's the amazing thing about this job, and really about Sullivan County history. Even after 30 years, I don't think a week goes by that I don't add to my body of knowledge. I learn something new virtually every week, and I'm always amazed at how many events of national and even international significance in some cases Sullivan County's been part of in some small way. And those kinds of surprises that I come across from time to time fairly regularly are really probably the thing that interests and excites me the most. But I think in a more obvious sense, what's more obvious to the people, I think, who witness the work that I do, you know, Sullivan County, as most people know, world renowned for its resort industry. And no one had the kind of tourism we had here outside of maybe Las Vegas, Nevada. Sullivan County is known throughout the country, if not the world, for its hotels, certainly during the Borscht Belt era and the Golden Age. But one of the first things that I realized when I became a historian was that very few people really understood how that all came about. You know, I think you talk to people, even those who you would think know better, maybe they were even part of the industry. There was this notion that, you know, we just woke up one day and there were these 538 hotels in our midst, and no one really gave much thought to how that developed, how did that evolve. Because the fact of the matter is that we did start at one time with 0 hotels. You know, we know when the first summer hotel was built now, because that's something that I took upon myself to reconstruct that whole evolution. And I think that's really important because I think that informs us to how things developed, what worked, what didn't work, and most importantly, the knowledge that the American vacation has continued to change and evolve on a regular basis. And I think if we had been better informed about that as our golden age was coming to an end in the mid-60s, we might have been better able to make the transition in a shorter period of time to whatever that next period would be. As it turns out, it's taken us 50 years or more to figure out where we're headed, and maybe we don't even know yet, but I think that's an important contribution that I've made, was reconstructing the timeline, if you will, of how Sullivan County's history in terms of the resorts evolved.
So Sullivan County became a county in 1808, correct?
1809.
1809. So before that, we were Ulster County, correct? So now, does your knowledge go to the actual, land that is Sullivan County, even though it was Ulster County at the time? Does your knowledge go back, predate 1809?
Well, it does to a certain extent, because I'm fascinated by the whole colonial era, the Revolutionary War era. So those are particular interests of mine, and I've spent a lot of time researching that. Obviously, the county didn't exist at the time. Our first great industry, the timber rafting industry, which in many ways contributed to the growth of America, certainly the American Navy. That all predates the actual formation of the county itself, but because that activity took place here, where what is now Sullivan County, I consider that part of the body of knowledge that I should be conversant.
And then the Tannery Industry.
Yeah, the Tannery Industry comes along in the 1830s, and we see again how that moves into Sullivan County, starts in the Berkshires, the notion of hemlock tanning, which is what we had here. It progresses as they use up the hemlocks. We see it go from the Berkshires to Greene County to Ulster County to Sullivan County. And by the way, when we use up the hemlocks here in the 1880s, it continues to move westward. And we have records of some families, particularly Irish immigrants who came in to work in the tanneries, who continued to move on with it. And these are all things that have come about because of research and years of digging, and they're not intuitive kinds of stories. You have to really look for them. But a lot of the stuff you find by accident. I don't want to say that everything was intentional. You do come across a lot of things accidentally. You're looking for A and you find B, C, and D, and you say, oh my God, look, I never realized.
Some of the things that are fascinating is having read some of the articles, particularly about some criminal acts that took place, in the past, and some of the characters and some of the We think life can be brutal now, but boy, there were some brutal activities way back when.
Well, that I think all comes with the hotel industry. This was a happening place, and many of the old timers who are no longer with us told me over and over again that if you didn't live through it, there's no way that I could ever get you to understand what it was like here at that time. So we're talking about those roaring 20s and the 30s and the 40s, probably up until we get to the post-war years. But particularly in the 30s, I think, when the hotel industry was transitioning from what had been here for many years before to the new Jewish clientele that was coming up, we had this whole element of Jewish gangsters coming into the mountains and taking advantage of this massive hotel industry here to put their slot machines in the hotels and to take a piece of the concessions at all the hotels. And, this was big business for them. Mm-hmm. So between bootlegging in the 20s and gambling in the 30s, the inevitable bodies would pop up here and there, and that was a pretty happening time. And the interesting thing is that for years when people talked about it, the notion was that the county had been a dumping ground for organized crime out of New York City, that they'd kill people in the city, bring them up and dump them. Now, I'm not saying that didn't happen, but what no one ever really bothered to piece together was the fact that a lot of those killings took place right here in Sullivan County and had ties to the hotels or what was happening here. Mm-hmm. They were not bodies that were
carted from the city.
Yeah, brought up from the city, exactly. So, we've got bodies in the lakes, bodies along the road. We had our fill of it during the 30s. It was a pretty fascinating time.
You're also president of the Fort Delaware Company. So tell us a little bit about that, because that dovetails right into history.
Sure. The Delaware Company, we formed in 2012 to more or less, it started out, the notion was to be a friends group for Fort Delaware, which obviously the county owns, and the county operated when taking it over from James W. Burbank, who built it in 1957. County assumed control, actually bought it from Burbank for $31,000 in 1970, and they operated it ever since. And obviously, as a part of the county, Fort Delaware was always kind of a victim, if you will, to the vagaries of the local economy. If there was a budget crunch in the county, Fort would feel it, and so on. So we got the idea to create a friends group for Fort Delaware, and that's really where the notion of the Delaware Company came from. But I always felt that there should be a broader mission, and so once it was formed, we went beyond being a friends group for Fort Delaware to be a group that promoted and supported history and historic landmarks throughout, not just Fort Delaware, but including Fort Delaware. And then, as you know, Mike and Rob, because you guys were a big part of it, as part of your move really to privatize a lot of county-owned operations, which, let's face it, the county really doesn't have history as one of its core competencies. That's what we do, and promotion is what we do, and so it made a lot of sense. We pushed for years for the county to allow us as a nonprofit to take over and operate Fort Delaware. This finally happened last year.
Even after the death threats from your wife, I still said yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure we should actually go into that story, but my wife wasn't a big fan of the undertaking, and it is a massive undertaking. Let's face it.
It is.
But I think it's been good for the county. It's certainly been good for Fort Delaware, I think. So obviously, we're not saving all of the money that the county invests in Fort Delaware every year. You still own the property. Mm-hmm. You still have capital costs. You still have insurance, et cetera. But the operating costs for there, well over $100,000 a year. We're now assuming that, and we're raising the money to do that. And the legislature's been helpful in that regard as well. But I think that this enables us to appeal to the people who are using the fort to help support it. And the people who don't use the fort, they're no longer required to pay through their tax dollars to support it. So to me it makes sense, and I've always been a fan of public-private partnerships, as you know, and It's something we've talked about extensively, and I think this is a win-win. We're also providing programming services at the Minnesink Battleground, and I think we had a major coup just this last week. One of the things that have always bugged me about the Minnesink Battleground, people come to me all the time and they say, we walk the trails at the Minnesink Battleground and there are these little posts with numbers on them. What are those posts supposed to mean? What do those numbers mean? And no one ever knew. I mean, we knew that they were supposed to designate something, and there were different colors as well as different numbers, but no one had the legend. No one knew what are they supposed to show. Turns out there were 3 separate brochures. We knew that there were multiple legends attached to these. We actually the county had no record of them. We couldn't find them in the files. We finally found all 3 brochures this past week, and so one of the projects we wanted to undertake was to reinstate those posts, get those numbers back up, and reprint these brochures.
And that's ideal, because I've been there.
Yeah, it's a huge thing, because believe me, people come from all over to hike at the Minnesink Battleground. People who are Revolutionary War buffs, people who like hiking. It draws people for a lot of different reasons. And I spend a lot of time at the Minnesink Battleground year-round. Wintertime, we see folks. Woodlock Springs brings people over from the housing development, Woodlock Pines, the hotel. They have a van that comes with guests. They bring them to the Battleground to hike. Occasionally I've met them and given them a guided tour. Local people are there all the time, year-round. So it's a great asset to the county, and especially in addition to the historical aspect, the trails, which the county built back in the 70s when Joe Purcell was the Parks and Rec director. The county did a great job of acquiring additional land to augment the actual battleground, to build these trails, and as I said, to create these brochures so that people would know what they're looking at, wildlife, historical, and natural rock outcroppings and so on. So people come for that reason, and I think particularly with the county's health outcomes being as poor as they have been, the use of trails, I think, is one of the key components in improving those outcomes. And I think the emphasis that you guys have put on the rail trails, for example, is now starting to show as you get better and better news about the health outcomes. Some of the best trails in the county are at the Minnesink Battleground. And so I think it's a great venue for hiking, even if you're not that interested in history.
Be ready, though. The topography there is challenging.
Yeah, there's a couple of really good challenging trails, and there's some trails that if you're not able, you're not so physically able, they're fine. But if you want a little bit more challenging, the Rock Shelter Trail, yeah, absolutely. So that's what makes it so great, is that regardless of your ability, I mean, let's face it, it's not a rail trail, it's not level, and it's not improved. There's some rough terrain, but the trails are kept up really well, and I think for people of almost all abilities, it's a great place to hike, as I said, even if you're not that into the history.
Yeah, there's obviously there's a lot of history for people to embrace here. So just speaking of the battlegrounds, the fort, and the Delaware Company, if people want to support or want to be part of, how do you reach out to the community?
Well, we do a lot of fundraisers. We do events that we attach to the fundraisers, so they're historical events. We spearheaded the first annual Upper Delaware Shad Fest, the Festival of the Founding Fish, we call it, which took place in May. Brought in hundreds of people from all over. Had events from Port Jervis to Hancock, I might say, above and beyond Sullivan County, but the bulk of it was centered here. We do a lot of other programs. We've got some coming up in September. The best place for people to go if they're interested in contributing is to go to the website. It's thedelawarecompany.org, all one word, thedelawarecompany.org. And we have a donate button, and it would be great if people help us out. We try to give people a good bang for their buck, though. We try to do programming that educates and entertains and enables us to raise some money to pump back into things.
Lessons of History was something that was written by Will Durant a long time ago after he wrote his exhaustive collection of the history of the world. So, speaking of lessons of history, bring it back to Sullivan County, something current. We're talking about redistricting in our county. Every 10 years, the census is taken, and we go through this process. As a historian, within that context, just explain redistricting.
Well, I think it's really great that people who are alive today, for the most part, have lived through this transition from the Board of Supervisors to the Legislature. And I hear so many times people say, we should go back to the Board of Supervisors. Those guys really knew how to get stuff done. And I think people who say those kinds of things really don't know their history, because the Board of Supervisors, it certainly had strengths that we don't have with the Legislature, but I think the number of issues that were kicked down the road or that were never addressed at all because the supervisors were loyal first to their towns, the county always came second. That was a major problem, which the Legislature was designed to address and to prevent. So we no longer have people representing a town. Mike, I know you live in Neversink, Rob lives in Bethel, but you don't represent the town of Neversink, you represent the people in your district. And so this is a major change. And I think it's been a positive change for the county. Personally, I think we need to move toward a county executive. That's a whole nother story. Shouldn't diminish, but in fact will, I think, enhance the power of the legislature. People don't understand that notion. So education is a big part of my job. It's what I think of as my number one priority, is to educate the public. And I think the more people know about history, the better citizens they can be. You have to know your history in order to be a good citizen. So I'm not sure that answered your question, but I think being witness to the transition to the legislature and seeing how that has changed the way the county operates, and yet having the knowledge of what took place under the Board of Supervisors, which from 1809 to 1995, that was the form of government. That's a long time. A lot of things happened. Things changed. We had historic events.
What's that? A lot of things didn't happen also.
A lot of things didn't happen, as I said, because they were stonewalling, because they only wanted to do what was going to benefit their own towns. But the advent of weighted voting, that was something that, we took for granted. If you just began to follow the Board of Supervisors once weighted voting was in place, you really never thought about how did it used to function when each supervisor had one vote. Well, we're kind of back to the one man, one vote notion now, although the legislature addresses the inequities that the Board of Supervisors created when they had each supervisor with a single vote. At any rate, it's just been great to witness that, and I think we've all been witnesses to history in that regard.
We always love to have you, John. We wish we had more time. I find your knowledge fascinating, and thank you again for coming.
You're a walking encyclopedia, John, so thank you for sharing some of those pages with us.
My pleasure, Mike.
Okay, now we go on to the very special part of our program with a little Q&A with our chairman, Robert Doherty. Robert, for the 7th year in a row, the Sullivan County Manager's Office and Budget Office earned a Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the Government Finance Officers Association. We recently had the auditors come to a legislative meeting and discuss their audit results with us. Share with the audience the highlights of that.
Well, there's one major highlight of that, but first about the county manager and the budget office receiving awards. That award again for the 7th year in a row. I think that Josh Potosik is the correct person to be the manager of this county. He does an excellent job. His staff in the budget department is second to none. There are many highlights to the audit, but the major highlight to the audit is that the auditor stated that the county was financially stable for the first time as far back as we could see in 25 years. That is a significant difference on how this legislature was run before. We were bonding for roads, we were borrowing money, we were overspending money on projects, and all that has come to an end in this legislature. This legislature has been fiscally sound. Today, we approved up to $15 million for a major project at the college that would have never been possible before, because we watch our P's and Q's every day. not just on the big votes, but there's been a lot of stuff on a day-to-day basis that gets negotiated, and it gets negotiated in our favor for the first time, I think, probably in this legislature's, history, which is, I believe, 27 years old. So, I think going forward, keeping the county financially stable through good times and bad times, it's very important. We've had a long history of overspending in the good times and having to borrow in the bad times. That's not the case anymore with this legislature, and I think going forward, being fiscally sound is a good springboard to get a lot of things accomplished in this county that we've talked about for 30, 40 years. The college opened in 1971, and they've been talking about a pool in this county since 1971. I want you to think about that. That's most of our children's lifetimes. A lot of people who are watching now's lifetimes. My wife was born in 1972. So I think that's very important that we're able to afford projects like that, but that gets done on a day-to-day basis. We're not bonding that money. We're going to use, last year we didn't spend $16 million of the budgeted money because we tightened our belt for projects just like this, and that's what the county needs to do. Be fiscally sound going forward, and we can improve the lives of everyone in this county going forward.
So as well as being fiscally sound, and also just being able to look at the county as a whole and reallocating once where money went, where money shouldn't be going anymore, or to cut it back and just to actually tackle every issue as you alluded to, and which such as the college. It's an asset. It's a huge asset, such as our airport.
So using our assets, that's one thing that this county, that this legislature has done. We've made a list of our assets, the airport being one, the community college being another one. For the first time in next year's budget, our county airport, which I believe is 53 years old, will not lose money for the first time ever. You hear people say, "Oh, you made it into a gas station." Well, that's how they make money. That's the whole purpose of an airport. That's how they generate revenue. You don't get it off of land leases. You get it off of fuel. And this legislature looking at the airport, saying, "Okay, how can we make this better?" Bringing in hot solar air, and having them build their world headquarters here. That's a plus for the county. Looking at the college, speaking with the college president and saying, what are your needs to make this place better? You get a laundry list of things, and you have to, go through them and, what's most important, to the community as a whole. This legislature, was the first in the state of 62 counties to pay for the first year for all high school graduates. When they go to our local community college, we pay for that. And we're going to most likely do the second year as well, which is, think about that, graduating high school, and then your first 2 years of college are being paid for. That encourages more people. We currently, today, as a matter of fact, we took the fare off the bus line, the Move Sullivan line, to help people move around the county more. And that's all possible because we're financially stable. All this stuff was never possible before because we weren't frugal in every decision, but now we are, and that changes the total complexion of the county.
Our ability to be able to get it done.
Correct.
Take a vision to its logical conclusion.
One of the things I spoke about in the legislature today was we can't look at other counties and say, well, that's what they're doing, this is what they're doing. We have to look at ourselves and help ourselves. We have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and be able to move this county forward as a whole. I believe, we allocated, I know for a fact we allocated $15 million today to the college, but that passed on an 8-1 vote. Think about that for a second. We passed, all our major decisions in this legislature has passed on supermajorities, and that's just another example of a major decision being passed on a supermajority.
Being ever that optimist, looking at what's going to be going on at the college, just that in specific, with Olympic-sized pool,
Yeah.
with a indoor track.
Correct. A 200-meter track. So there's 4 in our area. There's 5 in our area. West Point. So if you're a Section 9 runner in high school, you have only West Point has one in Section 9, and the track meets don't start till 7 o'clock at night on Sunday nights. So you're not getting home till 1, 2 o'clock. You only do it one day a week. We're here. We're going to be able to have track meets. You could hold state track meet events here. You can have colleges use the track. There's a lot of tourism possibilities with that track because there's only 5 in about 150-mile radius of here.
No, and having done that West Point trip many times late into the evening, it's going to be such a huge thing for Section 9 to be, and perhaps, like you said, state meets coming here, us hosting that. I used this word earlier today. SUNY Sullivan can become quite buzzworthy, if you will, by extension in county, because when this gets built and starts getting utilized, not just the athletes that partake, the coaches, everybody else, the spectators that come in view, it's like, wow, you see what Sullivan County is doing, and I think that creates something, that buzz that we haven't had in Sullivan County in such a long time. I think it's something to look forward to. Thank all our colleagues for most of our colleagues for voting for this 8-1.
It's all because we're financially prudent, and we did all this while taking off $20 million of debt ahead of schedule. So not only were we able to do this project, but we have also taken off $20 million worth of debt ahead of schedule because we're financially prudent in everything that we do, in every decision we make, which has never happened before, and that's why it's important. And if you have a chance to look at the audit report, it's absolutely fascinating, and it's a great job by all our colleagues.
And not to mention, Rob, our change when we came aboard this new legislative term, looking at things differently, doing things differently, reallocating, so on and so forth, all amongst COVID, which the uncertainties that brought to us, we didn't know a lot of how things were going to pan out. So the decisions that were made and the path that we went on has led us to this point where we could actually entertain this type of a project in Sullivan County, which is it's fantastic. And this is such a changing moment for Sullivan County, the way I look at it, and the college, absolutely. And I can't wait for this to move forward. So on my list is also the school or the pool at the college, and we've talked about that. So last thing, Rob, is redistricting. It's been in the papers. We have people come to our meetings and talk about it. So where are we at, and the timeline?
Okay, so one thing I want to make clear before we get into redistricting is that tweaking is gerrymandering. Make no bones about that. Anytime you hear someone say tweak, they're trying to make their district better for themselves. That is the very definition of gerrymandering. So I wanted to have a public hearing today. Some of our legislators wanted to move it off to next month. So I agreed. So on August 11th, there's going to be a public hearing, which is mandatory by our charter. We're going to have a public hearing. Josh Patosik, the county manager, and Chris Knapp, gentleman that is in charge of real property downstairs, and Chris Knapp gets granular about how maps are made. I talked about the census cells. There'll be a map of the census cells. You'll understand how they work and how the different districts were created under the new rules put forth by Governor Hochul. It really changed how things were done. Before, you were allowed to have a 10%. So the way it works is, I just want to be clear. You take the census number, which comes from the United States government Census Department. They give you a number. You divide by 9. That's the mean. So off of that number, that's the average number of people that are going to be in each district. You cannot have the biggest district to the smallest district of those 9 cannot be more than 5%. It used to be able that you were allowed to be 10%, but that's not the case anymore. So on one map you have Liberty and Monticello in the same district. That's because one of the rules clearly states that you have to have like issues. That's why George Conklin in all the maps goes from Fremont down to Tustin, because the like issues is the river and the western end of the county. And so when people are shouting and hooting and hollering, you have to understand the history of how these maps, this current map came about, the map before that came about. It was one person who had written a letter to the legislature saying Jeffersonville should not be part of District 1. In the last map it was, and was from the beginning of the legislature. So to say that it shouldn't be, it was. It was, some backroom deal, I guess you could say, that it got moved. Because last time they only put up one map. We have a choice of 3 maps, which I think is much better for the public. And I think that it's hard decisions to make. Again, I feel that, I look at it as a county-wide issue. I don't look at it as just my particular district. I think whatever's best for the county. I think the majority of the legislature feels the same way about it.
Obviously, you're never going to make everybody happy. I mean but this process, when you understand it, is that there's reasons why things were done, and everybody's going to have an opinion, because this can be. We can do this ad nauseum and take a little bit from one section, but it's domino effect where it affects on the other side of the county.
Tweaking is gerrymandering,
and it is, and there's 3 maps. There's a choice, and there's rational thought behind all 3 maps. So I look forward to the day when we can vote on that. And one last thing I'd like to mention before we wrap it up for today is that there is a new mental health hotline across the state. Ours in Sullivan County happens to be hosted and staffed in Dutchess County. But if calls come in from Sullivan County, they will get forwarded to our 911 center. That number is 988. So if you or someone you know is suffering from mental health distress, symptoms, what have you, 988 is the new number. So I want to thank Rob, as always. Thank you, sir.
It's always a pleasure, Mike.
It is a pleasure, with a smile.
It's fine.
And also to John Conway, our county historian. We could talk for a long time, John, and history is fascinating. And thank you for the part that you do in Sullivan County for helping us learn about and understand the history of Sullivan County. So with that, folks, enjoy the day, and bye for now.